I take myself out of the comfort zone with the goal of learning? And that learning could be the thing that I just did is something that I never want to do ever again. That's okay. That's growth. That's growth, right? That's growth. But I don't think we often think of it that way. We have to engineer toward perfection. And if we're engineering toward perfection, we would never have the courage to take a step into something that is unfamiliar or uncomfortable. And that limits our ability to transform.
Episode 17, Being Present in the Moment with Ikigai expert Sam Ushio. Hello, everyone. For this episode, I'm honored to welcome Mr. Sam Ushio, founder and head of Ikigai Lab. I met Sam through the US Japan Council. Ikigai Lab is about organizational leadership, employee engagement, innovation, impact, and so much more. And I'd love to hear how Japanese values embodied in the word Ikigai might inspire his work. What is Ikigai to begin with, and how has his own life journey influenced his entrepreneurship? I'm also excited to hear about his family history and what it was like growing up in an area without many other Japanese Americans, but also have such strong ties to his relatives, including those in Japan. We'll also include the discuss. I'm sorry. We'll also discuss the importance of mental wellness, community building, and people-to-people relations. So thank you very much, Sam, for joining me today.
Thank you, Shiori. I'm very excited to connect with you.
Thank you. If I may start first by asking where you were born and raised, that'd be great.
Yes, absolutely. So I was born in Denver, Colorado, at a very young age. I think before 1 year, before I turned a year old, my parents moved back to small town Nebraska, where they were high school sweethearts. So I associate growing up in Alliance, Nebraska, which is a rural community in western Nebraska with a population of about 10,000 people.
Okay, that's wonderful. But you're now based in Seattle, right?
Now based in Seattle, correct. So I've been in
Okay.
Seattle since 2004, with a stint in Canada for a couple years between 2004 and now.
Okay. Thank you. And I think you mentioned to me that there was only other Japanese American family in town, but you also seem to have such really, really strong ties with your father's side of the family, the Japanese side of your family. So this seems like a really interesting contrast. And so, what did you think about your identity while you were growing up in Nebraska?
Yeah, so there are layers of nuance here. This community that I grew up in with 10,000 people, there was one other Japanese American family, at least with children that were around the same age as me. The vast majority of my friends that I grew up with were Caucasian, and largely growing up. So I'm half Japanese, I'm fourth generation Yonsei, um, and on my mother's side, I have 29 first cousins. So
Wow.
she's of Irish descent. She was the 10th child out of 11 children.
Wow.
So a lot of cousins on that side, and then on my father's side, um, he had three siblings. And so it was in a small town community. I think there were cousins almost every age. Every year in high school, my grandmother had someone graduating from high school on my mother's side.
Mm.
And then on my father's side, on the Japanese side, uh, the cousins on that side were in other cities. So I didn't grow up with them as much. Um, in terms of identity, my Japanese heritage was always there. So my grandfather, Nisei, he was in the 442 Battalion. My grandmother, Nisei as well, was an educator. When I believe in 1949, she got a degree from the University of Colorado as an educator. And so she
Wow.
taught country school initially, so in rural Nebraska at the time, farmers that kind of lived in remote areas. There were country schools, and she would teach students from all grades. And eventually, she opened up a preschool called the Small World Preschool. But it never occurred to me until later stages in life that she was a woman of color that got her degree. She was a Japanese American that got her degree a couple years after World War II ended
Yeah.
from university. So, the more distance that I get from just that, I just have an even greater appreciation for who she is and the role that she played
Hmm.
in my life. And so, like, she was an educator. My grandfather was a veteran, and both of them very active in the community. And so, my understanding of the Japanese culture was largely influenced by their civic engagement and kind of their understanding
Mm.
of contributing to the community aspect. But the actual Japanese culture was somewhat distant growing up.
Mm.
Um, Over the holidays, like in particular this around this time of year and New Year's, it seemed like there was more of a Japanese culture influence. But largely growing up, I think I associated my identity as being a small town Nebraska kid as much as anything. Now, I was very aware that I had, um, I was different. I was very aware that I was different. I mean, that growing up, that was pointed out often,
Mm.
oftentimes in kind of a way that was, difficult to process at the time. But I, I've just had this very strong community of supporters that were both of Japanese heritage, or Japanese American, Japanese Americans, or just family members who um, had no Asian proximity beyond being a cousin to me. Um,
Mm.
so I think that's probably a good way to kind of describe what
Mhm.
identity looked like growing up in small home
Mhm.
Nebraska.
Mhm. Thank you so much. And it sounds wonderful that you were able to turn to so many. And were there friends that you could turn to in terms of people who were also multicultural, even if they're not Asian or Japanese descent?
Little bit. The community was pretty homogeneous.
Okay.
But I didn't feel like I was othered. Probably the best way to
Mm.
describe it. I never felt like I was an outsider. And in many ways, I felt very accepted within the community. Um, at this stage in life, where I'm at a very different stage in life, looking back, it really is. Is inspiring, or like it gives me hope, just given the state of the world today that we're in, that
Mm.
kind of these communities can exist that kind of cut through a lot of the filters by which we have a tendency to see each other,
Mhm.
um, when you don't know somebody, but when you have that opportunity to build some form of a relationship, whether it's just I know your parents or your parents know my parents, or those little points of connection that come from growing up in a small town, um, just really uh, strengthen my sense.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you so much. And it's really encouraging to hear that you didn't encounter a lot of like othering or ostracization in the community that you grew up in. And you touched upon your family history about your grandparents, and your grandma sounds amazing. But I was wondering if you could go into a little bit of the family history. And so I understand you're fourth generation, but how did your great grandparents first come from Japan? And do you know, would you mind explaining a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the story that so this is on my grandfather's side, on Ushio's side, uh, and this really inspires what I do today. My great grandfather immigrated to the U.S. in the early 1900s. He was the eldest son next in line to be the head priest of a Shinto shrine in Fukuoka. And the shrine and the community was under strain, under duress. And so at 18 years old, they his name is Shigeo, they put Shigeo on a boat and said, you need to go to America to save the day. So he came to America. There was an unplanned stop in Hawaii where the shrine in Fukuoka is even today it's somewhat rural, so it's not in the city. So he was an 18-year-old rural, kind of farm kid, or grew up in the rural areas. So I believe he ported from Yokohama, and before the boat left for America, he got swindled out of all this money. So he had to, and all the money that was actually raised by the community to bring him to the United States.
That's so sad. Oh my goodness.
So he had to stop in Hawaii and work in the sugar plantations for years, I believe 2 to 3 years.
Oh,
and then eventually made his way to Seattle. I believe he ported here initially in Seattle. So he came to Seattle. My great grandmother Taka grew up in the same community and eventually came to America. And I believe in 1909, something like that. They were running a cleaner's business. They started to form a family. They had child 1, child 2, child 3. Right around between child 2 and 3, they had made their way to Salt Lake City and had purchased a cleaner's business. And they were running a cleaner's business. And the demands of the family, the demands of the business, the demands of supporting the legacy of this 1,200-year-old Shinto shrine and a community, just all that was pretty significant. So they made this decision that they were going to take the 3 children back to Japan, or I should say to Japan, because the children were born in America, take to Japan so that they could stay with family, so that the 2 of them could focus on running the business with the goal of reuniting everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty important inflection point in the family history. So that Taka boarded a boat here in Seattle. This is in 1919, and took the 3 children to Japan. At some point in that journey, Shigeo wrote a letter to Taka and said, I miss the children. Can you please bring the oldest child back?
Mm-hmm.
And his name was Joy. And so Taka and Joy came back to the United States, and then the 2 younger children stayed there. And this inflection point in 1919, when they were here in Seattle, there's a picture of the family of 5, and that was essentially one of the last moments that this family of 5 were together. So there's that chapter, and then you fast forward, there's another really important chapter in the story. About 20 years later, Taka and Shigeo had made their way into Alliance, Nebraska, this rural community where I grew up. They had purchased a cleaner's business there. Mm. At this point, this is 20 years later, this is over 30 years from their initial immigration from Japan to the United States. They're still sending money and food and clothing to Himori and the community. And Shigeo dies. And so Taka is a widow in rural Nebraska, running a cleaner's business with 2 children in Japan and now 4 children in America. And 18 months after Shigeo dies, the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. So in the midst of all the swirl, Taka finds herself, dealing with a lot. And she has a son who gets drafted into the Japanese army. She has a son who enlists in the American army, which is Grandpa Sam, who joins the 442 Battalion. And kind of throughout all of this, she she perseveres. So she overcomes and perseveres, and loses the son in the Japanese army at war. Grandpa Sam comes back a decorated war hero, and the Imoi Shrine still exists today as a result of all their sacrifice. But in particular, I think that those two chapters are really important chapters in the family history, and those are the two chapters that really had an impact on me, and having a better understanding of this Japanese concept of Ikigai, and also just having a better understanding of my personal journey. It fuels what I do and how I approach approach life in general.
Hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that incredible story. And I can only imagine how difficult it must have been, especially for your great grandmother. And it's incredible how much entrepreneurship they had, as well as innovative and pioneering spirit. The last time we had a conversation, you also shared that right now you have this really incredible uh, a tradition, or maybe it was one time so far, but you traveled along with 35 other family members back to Fukuoka and to visit the Imori Shrine. Would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, well, actually, it's 2 years ago now, in 2024, 36 family members from 11 cities in the United States traveled to Fukuoka to participate in a Shinto ceremony to pay respects to our ancestral heritage, and in particular, Shigeo and Taka's journey. Shuji Ushio is the current head priest at the Imori. He is the 49th consecutive generational head priest that they have on the list on the roster. And his son Kotohide will be the 50th. Kotohide is in his 30s, and so Kotohide and Shuji led us through this kind of ancient ceremony, um, and then also we hiked to the Haka to kind of pay our respects, and got to see these the Haka where I believe centuries of ancestral ashes are currently being held. So it was a very powerful experience. That was only the second time that I have been to Imori. This time was even, I mean, both times were very powerful, but this one was with my children, my wife, and my father and my siblings, and just it had a different texture to it than the previous one where it was just me. So yeah, thank you for asking. It was a pretty remarkable experience that still, I still get a lot of joy thinking about.
Hmm. I just cannot believe that all of your family members were in 11 cities and you managed to coordinate all of this. So somebody must have volunteered to like make sure you're in touch with the shrine. And was it you?
It was not me. It was not me.
Okay.
No, no, it was not me. That is not my skill set.
Okay.
Actually, so a really important person who I haven't mentioned yet in all of this story is my Auntie Julie. So Auntie Julie is in Hawaii.
Mm,
Um, Auntie Julie in the 80s was kind of exploring her identity. She grew up in small town Nebraska. I don't speak Japanese. She doesn't speak Japanese. My Nisei grandparents don't speak Japanese,
oh, wow.
right?
Okay.
So the Japanese language has never been a part of our life. And Julie grew up in small town Nebraska and was exploring her identity, eventually made her way to Alaska where she was a teacher, and then made her way to Hawaii where she was a teacher as well, and eventually became a financial advisor. Kind of when she was going through her journey, she wanted to explore her Japanese heritage. And at the time Taka was alive, she asked Taka if she would be willing to conduct an oral history interview. And Taka said yes. And as Julie was getting prepared for this, a lot of family members were encouraging Julie to not ask about the children. So
Mm.
this whole story about that picture, and in particular these children that were in Japan, um, there wasn't clarity on that chapter of the story, and so Julie sat down with Taka and conducted a number of interviews. And Taka, at that stage in life, I believe she was in her 80s, she wanted to talk about
Mm.
it. And through that conversation, Julie discovered that Taka wants to go back to Imori one last
Mhm.
time. And so Taka, Julie, and then my grandparents, Julie's parents, Grandpa Sam and Grandma Sai, all went to Imori in the early 80s. And this was my grandpa Sam, my grandma Sai, and my Auntie Julie's first trip to Japan. And
Oh
in that
wow.
experience, it unlocked this, it basically brought the two families back together or reunited for
Mhm.
the first time. The Ushios in Japan and Ushios in America. And since then, Julie has taken on this this incredible role and responsibility of uniting the two families. So she organized this trip, but she has done much more than just organizing this trip in 2024. She's conducted a number of different trips with a number of different family members and keeps in constant contact with our family
Mhm.
in Japan.
Mhm. That is so wonderful. I was going to ask how you managed to keep in touch over the years, but it sounds like having someone like that who really keeps everyone together and it really keeps track of who's where and what their schedule is and who's married into who and whatnot. That seems really, really important. Yeah, it's wonderful how she as she brought your great grandma to Japan while she was still alive. That's yeah, I can only imagine how touching that was. Thank you for sharing that. And while we're on family history, you mentioned that your mother's side is Irish, but do you also keep in touch with that part of your culture at all, or not so much in your daily life?
I do. I mean, probably not as much. I think uh, I definitely keep in touch with those family members. Those family members play a really important role. What's interesting is I have a tendency to observe a lot of components, or what I observe a lot of, like moai is an example, right? The Okinawan construct, social construct of a moai. I see the moai come through in my mother and her siblings, like
Really?
not her siblings, like her sisters. There are these 4, 5, 6 sisters that are a force of nature. That's the only way to describe them. And so, even though I have this construct of a moai that I incorporate into the work that I do at Ikigai Lab and almost everything that I do,
Mhm.
my interpretation of that, or my experience in that, is thinking of my mother and her 4 sisters, my aunts,
Mm.
sitting around a coffee table, gossiping and giving each other a hard time
Mhm.
when I was growing up. So on the Irish side, a little bit, not as much, but definitely those family relationships play an important role in who
Mhm.
I am.
Mhm. Thank you so much. And it's so interesting how you're bringing all these different cultures together. I would love to hear more about how you incorporate these not only the Japanese value Ikigai, but this Okinawan value of Moai in your work. But before that, I just want to take a step back and ask about your career. So I understand that you first started in finance and you worked there for about 20 years. So when you graduated college, like you probably had a selection of fields that you could go into, but why did you start in finance?
Uh, so Auntie Julie played an important role. Uh, she, uh, when I was young, I collected baseball cards,
Mm.
and baseball cards had an assigned value based on the player, how well the player was playing, basically for the most part.
Mhm.
And there was this print magazine called Beckett, the Beckett magazine, and they would publish that on some type of cadence, and it would list the price of each baseball card.
Mm.
And so you would go to the store and you'd look at your baseball card collection and you'd see that this one is worth 50 cents and now that one's worth $1, right? So there was this link that I was making between the player and the value. And in particular, there was a card. And
Mhm.
at some point, there was a conversation with Auntie Julie that helped me make the link between that and basically stocks and securities. All right, and so I kind of latched onto that at a pretty early age, probably middle school age would be my guess, and just started to make that link. Um, and as I went through college, I was a finance major and a marketing major, and just really found that fascinating. Um, so that played a pretty important role in going down that path. It was an interesting time as well, right? That was right around the the early stages of the internet and kind of moving into the .com, and so there was within the financial services industry, without going too deep into that story, but within the financial services industry, that industry was at an inflection point where a lot of access was getting democratized, and that was
Mm.
especially interesting, right? So there was a lot of appeal, and also there was a lot of timing that was working in my favor.
Mhm. And it's so cute how it all started with baseball cards. I never thought about that. That is so interesting that, yeah, the price changes and it's like stock. And I think it's so wonderful how you have this angle about thinking about society and not just finance and everyday values and things, but how, as you said, the access is democratized. I think that really feeds into your later career when you think about people to people relations and helping others. So thank you for sharing that. And then I also wanted to ask about how you transitioned into your own organization. So, was there a particular motivation or trigger that left you that made you want to go out on your own and perhaps leave finance for something different?
Yes, there was a lot. There was a lot. So I, roughly the last 10 years of my career in financial services was spent leading a management consulting team. And toward the tail end of that experience, we were consulting and coaching approximately 1,000 financial advisors per year. And I was just observing that everywhere in the industry was the word growth. And that definition of the word growth was always linked to growing, to money, financial
Mm.
growth. Grow the portfolio, grow the P&L, grow the enterprise value. And, um, and then simultaneously, I was observing a lot of highly successful people in the industry who also seemed very miserable. And so
Mm.
it's just like, why isn't growth, why is there an inverse correlation between financial growth and personal growth? And why aren't those two in more harmony? And at the time I was just thinking it was like personal growth has to be compromised in the quest for financial growth. I really locked into that and locked onto that. In 2017, I went to a conference, an industry conference in New York City, and I was grappling with a lot of this existential stuff. Uh, the last presenter of the conference was an ethics professor from Denver University. His name's Corey Cicchetti. And this was a room of about 700 people. This is in Manhattan. Everyone's wearing navy blue suits, right? It's like one of those types of, um, of conferences. And Corey tells this, he basically opens up his presentation by talking about meaning and money. And it just hits me like a lightning bolt. And I really, at the time, I felt like he was speaking directly to me. And then, like, I still have this notebook I had written down, like, now. He opened up his presentation by saying the world's most successful greyhound dog is named Cash. On the
Mm.
evening of Cash's biggest race, the owner pats Cash on the head and says, I'm really excited for your big race tomorrow, Cash. You've made a lot of money and fame and fortune and power and influence.
Mhm.
And you're going to win tomorrow because no one can stop you. And Cash looks up at the owner and says, I'm retiring right now. I'm not going to run the race. And the owner asks, why would you retire?
Mm.
You're going to win. You're going to have more money, more power, more influence. And Cash says, I'm retiring because I've been running on this oval track, not for money, not for power, not for influence. I've been doing it just to chase that rabbit. And I just found
Mm.
out that that rabbit is fake. And so I'm
Mm.
going to retire right now because I want to chase real rabbits in life. And so
Oh,
Corey
interesting.
tells this presentation to 700 people and opens up and says, this entire presentation is going to be about chasing real rabbits in life because society is built in a way where many of us are just chasing fake rabbits. And we don't even
Mm.
realize that we're chasing fake rabbits. And so right there was where I made this decision that I was going to depart corporate. And that started my journey from there.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And what seemed really interesting is that I think a lot of us struggle with, and you also, I think, mentioned to me before that for the first year or year and a half, you were unsure about what you wanted to do exactly. And so you went through meditation and talking to a lot of people, things like that. I was wondering if you might talk about that journey because I think typically it is very, very difficult, but you managed to have the courage to quit your full-time job, which I'm sure was very lucrative as well. So would you be able to share about that?
Yeah. So at the time, I was 40 years old, a month and a day when this lightning bolt hit. So
Mm.
there was a punchline a joke that I would make that it's a midlife thing. The more distance that I've gotten, the more distance from that decision, I realized that there is some truth to that. So I started to research this happiness U curve that exists that comes from the field of economics. It's not
Mm.
sociology or psychology. It's actually from the field of economics that tells us that in the span of life, around the midpoint in life, life satisfaction has a tendency to dip, and it dips for a lot of various reasons. There's there's scientific research that exists there. There's also anecdotal research. Jonathan Rauch wrote this book, The Happiness U Curve, and he found some pictures in the Smithsonian that were, or some art that was created in the, I believe, late 1800s that basically depicts these stages in life that reflects that. So that's an important part, I think, of the journey that many grapple with when we get to this midpoint in life. When I went through this experience, initially, I had created enough resources to take 6 months, 6 to 7 months. And at that time, I kind of just flung myself at the mercy of the universe. And there were things that I was always interested in doing, but I didn't have the bandwidth of the time. And so I started to do those things like go to startup hackathons and different
Mm.
networking events. And then there were other things that were just that I was curious about. I think curiosity played a really important role that I leaned into, and that was exploring mindfulness and meditation and just different elements of trying to figure things out. Um, I refer to it as the second adolescence, right? It's like this
Mm.
second stage and developmental stage in life where I just took myself out of the comfort zone to learn. Giving myself that opportunity to do that and explore was one of the most fulfilling gifts that I will ever give myself in my entire life.
But how did you ultimately find what you wanted to do? Like you probably went through all these experiences, but was there one that hit more than the others? It was like, oh, this is it, or was it a gradual discovery, or?
It's just failure after failure after failure after failure after failure. There was all failures. There was learning lessons. There was crumbs of knowledge picked up in failure. Um, 18 months worth of experiments, and so at the time I was learning all this new information, and what I was learning was that human-centered design and systems thinking and strengths-based positive psychology and all emotional intelligence and all these incredible topics And I was thinking, where have these topics been? I'm 40 years old. I was running a management consulting group at a global organization. Like, where has this been? And if I don't never had access to this stuff, I'm sure there's a lot of the population that hasn't. So I'm gonna, especially in the industry, the financial services industry that I was in. So I just said, I'm gonna take all this and I'm gonna start to create instructional design and some curriculum to bring it back into the industry. So this is pre-Ikigai days, and I was knocking on doors and going into a very difficult market, we'll just say, a very difficult industry to talk about why a very wealthy, typically male individual should consider emotional intelligence and mindfulness and meditation to be a more successful leader, to be a better in relationships with their even with their clients. And I think at the time when I was knocking on these doors and making that pitch, I'm pretty sure at least one out of two people thought that I was completely crazy. I think
Wow.
they were just like, this is way too out there. But um, the key use case here in Seattle, next to the Space Needle, is the Museum of Pop Culture.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
in the Museum of Pop Culture, at the time, they had the world's first Marvel exhibit. This is like when the Avengers had initially started, or right around that. And so I brought a bunch of financial advisors into that office or into that space and really just challenged them to think differently. Like, what can we learn when we immerse ourselves in creative environments? And why did the curator put Iron Man here and Hulk there? And what can you learn about curating a client experience? And, so it wasn't so far fetched. It was. I think it was logical, but it was just too far out there. And so after that experience, I just realized this is not working. And that was
Mm-hmm.
when I found this picture of Shigeo and Taka and the three children. And it just, for me, it crystallized the concept of, of purpose. At the time, I had started to explore Ikigai as a framework, as a methodology. And Shigeo and Taka's story, in particular Taka's story, especially just brought this concept of Ikigai to life in a very personal and meaningful way. And so that's where I made the decision. It was about this time, 7 years ago, where I had the first Ikigai workshop with 11 willing guinea pig participants in a co-working space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how would you define the word ikigai?
Uh, so I mean, the way that I define it is reason for being, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then that comes with some nuance. I think the best way to really describe it is intentionality,
Okay.
intentionality in the moment. Um, that doesn't mean that we are always intentional. So gratitude, presence, um, service beyond self, these are all concepts and phrases that resonate with my interpretation of Ikigai. It's definitely, as you know, and probably most of your listeners know, it is not a four-circle Venn diagram. Um, Even though it has been claimed, has been westernized as a four-circle Venn diagram. I think that
Mm-hmm.
model has some value, has some application, but it's definitely not the the true definition of Ikigai.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, as a Japanese speaker, of course, I first encountered it in the Japanese context, but I was really surprised to hear that it came into the American or English speaking vernacular about 10 years ago in the Venn diagram. As you said, it is useful, but I think there is some nuance lost because Ikigai is not necessarily about your life profession. It could be, but for some people, it's about raising children or something else. And so, thank you for that definition, how you talked about gratitude and presence and service for others. I think that's a really rich and contextual way to look at it. And so moving on to Ikigai Lab. So would you mind talking a little bit about some of the goals that you have and some of the main activities?
So Ikigai Lab is a social enterprise that focuses on human sustainability and societal impact. We do that through a number of different engagements. There are individual journeys where we'll take different segments of the population through a Ikigai roadmap. So it's a process by which they have a foundation for who am I? So before I can determine my why, I first need to figure out the answer to who. I think oftentimes there's that disconnect when we're grappling with what's my reason for being. There are multiple challenges there. One is just that existential question. If we get stuck in that existential question, we're not realizing just the gift of presence and being in this moment right now. Right? So we're so stuck in thinking forward or thinking backward that we don't realize just the gift that is this moment. There's also work that we do with organizations. So a lot of the work with organizations is rooted in, fostering stronger organizational cultures built on belonging, psychological safety, improving employee engagement. In both of these journeys, we incorporate strengths-based positive psychology, so Gallup's Clifton Strengths. So it also kind of gives everyone a sense for what are the values that are important to me, establishing that foundation, and then extending into what are the themes of talent that makes me unique. So those are two key areas. We host an annual event. So there's the Ikigai Summit. Historically, it's been called the Ikigai Summit. We rebranded it this year to be called Repurpose by Ikigai Lab. And then on the horizon, there is a new offering called the Ikigai Design Studio, which essentially is an operating system that integrates the world's greatest R&D lab, which is nature. So how do we get into the outdoors? And then on the other end of the spectrum, how do we successfully integrate AI, regenerative, restorative AI, in a productive way for exploration on the individual side, but also accelerating innovation for the individual or the organization. So those are the key areas where Ikigai Lab is dedicating time and energy.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much for illustrating all of that. It seems like you have a wide breadth of activities, and I really love how you appeal to the individual in terms of discovering that process and what makes them the happiest, but also you appeal to leaders who have to lead those organizations. And I also wanted to ask about so we have all these different types of people within the organization, and you also have now AI. And so, what makes a good leader who's able to orchestrate all of that and bring out the best in people? Do you, yeah, would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's empathy, it's compassion, it's emotional intelligence, it's a human skills. Um, the way that I'm approaching AI from an EKI lab perspective is this isn't the first time we've had a technology that has transformed the world. So it seems like it's
Mm,
transforming it at a different level. How do
mm,
you leverage that AI to innovate? And that innovation can be in your professional, that could be in your personal, that could be in a lot of spaces. But let's not lose sight in the fact that um, creativity and innovation are largely born from human beings coming together and having conversation, right?
mm,
Even before AI was mainstream and commonly accepted, the 70% of employee engagement was the manager. So
mm,
people join organizations, people leave managers. So if you have a manager that doesn't have the interpersonal skills for whatever reason, and a lot of times people move into management at that midpoint in life, at the happiness hue curve. So they're dealing with some other stuff, some existential stuff that exists beyond just their role in the office. But I think a lot of it has to come back to um, emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills and just presence. Uh,
mm,
the there's so much data and research on building and maintaining relationships. And I think oftentimes people think that it takes a heavy lift, and in particular in the workplace, I don't think it takes that much. I mean, it could be something as simple as just a quick Slack message, just checking in, how's everything going,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that's a low energy output. There's high value perceived by an associate that reports to a manager that's just making that intentional um, act on an ongoing basis. There's that, and then also these values and themes of talent. If if people have a better understanding of themselves and they are seen through that lens. So if you said communication is one of my core values, and now I'm starting to view every conversation with you through that core value, I can start to
Hmm.
reciprocate through your core values or your themes of talent.
Mm.
I can start to filter through the positive lens, right? So I
Right.
think managers can do more of that
Mm.
to be more successful in just building stronger relationships.
Mhm.
Understanding,
Mhm.
help the people understand who they are, and then reinforce that you see them through that lens.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much. It sounds um earlier when we were talking about AI, you said you really need to meet people where they are, but it sounds like bosses also need to do that to really understand each individual and their strengths. And behind all of this, of course, is psychology. And I wanted to ask about that aspect of your career as well. It sounds like that was one of your majors. So it seems like you have had an interest for a very long time, and you're now the leader of the mental wellness affinity group in USJC. Would you mind would you mind answering about how that interest developed and how you've incorporated that into your career?
Yeah, I recall the first class that I took in university, the first psychology class, that was just very enlightening. But I think there were steps along the way on the journey that were interesting to me. When I was young, I played basketball, and I can still remember a book that I read that talked about visualization, right? Like visualize making the basket before you shoot the basket,
Mm.
and the probability goes up that you will make the basket. So so that was always interesting to me. Like the mind was always interesting to me, and I think probably that was a component of spending a lot of time with Grandma's side. Like this educator, this curiosity that just did a lot of things, um, and then even in the professional world, when I was heavy in like the portfolio construction and investment selection of the finance stuff, what I was getting the most energy, where I was driving the most energy, was actually on behavioral finance and behavioral economics,
Mm.
and this notion that we aren't robots, and people don't always make the most rational decision. And I always found that really appealing and interesting. And so I started to steer my career that path. So it's always kind of been foundational, whether the title the title was in financial services or not. I think the behavioral, the psychology has always been a constant thing.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's so interesting and so important, especially now, because I think there's so many of us who are struggling with the mental wellness aspect of it. And one of the things that I really admire about you is that you have this ability to build a community. And of course, you do that through your work, but also through USJC and other places as well. And when we first had a conversation, you were so well prepared. You really thoroughly um, read my bio and background and made sure you were really present, as you said. So you really seem to embody all the values that you mentioned earlier that are important for leaders. And so I was wondering, how do you have any specific things that you try to keep in mind to create all these genuine and lasting connections?
Well, first off, your bio is very appealing and interesting. So some
Thank
of
you.
it's
You're
just
very
the
kind.
genius that is you. Um,
Thank
uh, there I don't. I know I keep on mentioning these Clifton strengths, but individualization is a theme. So two themes that I lead with in particular are connectedness and individualization. And so going through that process and claiming that those themes of talent are themes that are unique to me was very informative in just helping me have a better understanding of myself, right? And I think a really big part of that was making space to understand that, to look at that from a number of different angles and then claim it. And it's not like as soon as I claimed it, it was immediately part of the identity. It's like very fluid. It's just like I've decided that connectedness and individualization are innate. And so that just comes natural. But how can I even be more intentional about that? If this is natural and it's it's easy to me, then how can I do that in an even better way? So I think that's a big part of how I've come to that. I think that kind of leads into the question at the beginning of just identity. That's been a really critical part of me understanding who I am, regardless of whether I'm Japanese American or small town Nebraskan or Seattleite or whatever. A lot of the foundational stuff kind of comes back to these core values and themes of talent.
And I think that leads really nicely into the next question that I wanted to ask is if you have any advice for others who are really struggling with their identity. So how, to discover yourself and who you are. This could be like about cultural and ancestral roots, but it could be about just overall, like what do you want to do with life? Yeah, would you have any advice on that self-discovery process on what people should do?
I think the time and space has premium value these days. I think there's an increasing value on giving yourself the luxury of time. We are in a fast-paced society that is not slowing down, and notifications and alerts are everywhere. And oftentimes I think they're out there driving our decision making more than we even realize. So making that time and like trying to do this with all that noise, pretty challenging. But sometimes that noise is it's a factor of life. So even if it's being intentional about carving out 15 minutes a day every morning when I have my tea or my coffee, that is my 15 minutes where there are no notifications and I'm just going to write down what's in my mind. Okay? So I think there's introspection, there's prompts, there's a lot of stuff that you can do in terms of, what are your core values? Who's an important person in your life? What did you learn from them? What's an experience? There's all these prompts that exist. Those prompts are great, but if you haven't invested in the time to process that, it becomes more challenging. It's not impossible, but it becomes more challenging. So that's a really important first step. I think the second step, so many will get to that space where they will say, I did it. I went to a workshop, I went to a retreat, I do the thing, still kind of grappling with it. Feedback loops are really important, right? So doing the thing is important, but coming back and revisiting, what did I learn? So I think of a really simple framework of just do it, like making space, thinking, introspection, and then from that, taking a very small step out of the comfort zone, right? So how do I take myself out of the comfort zone with the goal of learning? And that learning could be the thing that I just did is something that I never want to do ever again. That's okay. That's growth. That's growth, right? That's growth. But I don't think we often think of it that way. We have to engineer toward perfection. And if we're engineering toward perfection, we would never have the courage to take a step into something that is unfamiliar or uncomfortable. And that limits our ability to transform. And so I think of it in terms of like, how do you build and construct these mini experiments, right? Even if it's a 7-day experiment, I typically put my head down when I'm walking and I don't say hello to anybody. For the next 7 days, I'm going to try to say hello to strangers as I walk in the street. And between Monday and Sunday, I'm going to do that. And on Monday, I'm going to revisit what I like about it. And maybe I decide I never want to do that ever again because there's a lot of grumpy people in my neighborhood. Maybe I decide, right? I think that's really important on the exploration process. So investing time, introspection, feedback loops. And there was one more. Oh, I think the most important part of all this, of everything, is best captured in a story. So, or a metaphor. When Michelangelo created David, Michelangelo said that David was in the rock. And he just had to release him from the rock, which is very different than the mindset of going in and he has to chisel to create David.
Right.
His perspective was that David was there and he just had to release or unlock the potential. And I think that's a very subtle but very significant mindset shift in every person's journey that is perpetual throughout life. It is not a one and done, right? It's not like I have this stuff figured out. By no means do I have any of this stuff figured out. I do have a foundation that I can constantly come back to. And so when, I think when we find ourselves in these spaces where we're grappling with the existential and we're like, oh my gosh, who am I? What am I? Am I doing the right thing? Am I making mistakes? When we give ourselves that grace to come back to, I'm unique, I have talents, I have gifts. It's a gift that I'm even here, right? There are Taka and Shigeos in everyone's life that have made sacrifices to get you here. So that sense of the big and the small in the moment, I think is especially important when we find ourselves grappling with those bigger existential questions.
Thank you so much. And that is so inspiring because I was going to ask about the mental aspect of it. How do you stay strong when, as you mentioned earlier, you said like one failure after another. When that happens, like nothing fits, like everything is uncomfortable. How do you keep going? And I think that change in mindset and also taking one step at a time, like you just decide on a certain period, oh, for the next 7 days, I'm going to focus on this and then I'll go on, I think is super, super helpful. One last thing I wanted to ask about is, earlier I asked about how that self-discovery process for a year and a half that I'm sure was painful for you in many ways, but you persevered. And so when it's clear that there's happiness out there and you just have to take an extra step, but you have to let go of something that was previously important to you, or you feel like you invested so much time and money in a certain career and it seems too important, or you feel like you might disappoint others. In that sense, it takes a lot of courage to move on or to let go. Would you have any advice for people like that?
So I think this is a mindset perspective as well because um, when I initially made the decision to go down this Ikigai path, I launched a podcast, right? And when I launched that podcast I launched largely for personal reasons to rationalize at the time what I believe was a crazy decision to go into this wisdom tradition. And so I wanted to find stories of people who brought that concept to life for me, right? Um, and and so going down that path, what I realized was For a very small period, I did what I call a purpose speakeasy. We called it midlife. And it was like this
Mm.
underground purpose speakeasy where people who professionally have everything right. The
Mhm.
resume is perfect. I'm running this business line. I've gone to these schools. I've done these things. They could come into this kind of sacred space and share. Because what I realized was when I was saying I'm going the Ikigai route, I was terrified.
Mm.
But what I realized simultaneously was that a lot of people, it opened a door for people to come in and say, I'm terrified. And a lot of the people who were coming through that door were people that I did not expect coming through that door. Some
Interesting.
were former colleagues, some were people that I knew just, from social media. Um,
Mm.
and so when I launched this Purpose Speakeasy, I mean, there were people who were doing some pretty remarkable things according to society's measures, and they would come in and have these conversations, and we're all dealing with the same stuff. I mean,
Wow.
some version of the same stuff. So that
Mm.
was illuminating for me that we're all grappling with some stuff, and I don't want to discount that some things are bigger than other things.
Mm.
Um, but I think our ability to give ourselves grace and and um, and have confidence in who we are, so that we can move through these difficult moments, is everything. And that kind of comes back to the definition of ikigai being not what am I on this planet to do, but it's more about the presence in the moment. So it gives us
Mm.
agency and control and kind of brings it into this moment, into the now. And that doesn't mean that we're always intentional in every single moment. There are plenty of moments where I make mistakes and but I have this foundation that I come back to. That's especially relevant as as a partner, as a parent, in every form of identity that I have out there. Um, so for those that are grappling with it, I think, uh, I kind of think of what would the world be like if those thought bubbles that exist in cartoons were reality, and there was also like an energy thing or a happiness meter in that thought bubble, and I think we would see a lot of we would find a lot of common ground with people that we wouldn't anticipate finding common ground with.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the main
Thank you.
point there is you're not alone. We're not alone.
Oh. Mhm. Mhm. Thank you so much. It's so comforting to hear that. And I think that the speakeasy is such a wonderful way to put it and wonderful concept. And I just wanted to say that I think it's because you create this safe space. And I think people find you really comforting to talk to. And the fact that you're doing this is a huge service to all of us. So thank you so much for doing that. And also the fact that you said that the self-discovery process or thinking about who we are is a perpetual process that we just need um, to continue to do. It sounds like it's probably like a muscle that we need to train as well. And so there's no use just running away from it because we have to face it in one way or another in our lives anyway. So thank you so much. I think that covers all the questions that I wanted to ask, but is there anything you'd like to add?
I'm very grateful to connect with you, Shiori, and I value our relationship that we established through USJC, um, and look forward to continuing that relationship with you through USJC and beyond, and just everything that you represent. I listened to a couple of the podcasts that you've done in the past, and
Thank you.
I think the way that you are putting yourself out in this world has tremendous value as well.
Thank you. Thank you. You're
Yeah.
very kind.